Hey everybody, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here with another Servant Spotlight, this time for the Dragon Rider Saint, Martha. We'll be going over her skills and stats as well as pointers on how to utilize her effectively and an overall score comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. And I also have another spotlight up today on the channel for the other 4-star rider, Marie. She has been heavily requested, so please be sure to check that out right after you finish this video. But for now, let's move on to Martha's stats. Martha has an incredibly high max HP of 13,068, putting her not only above all the other 4-star riders and most 4-stars in general, but even above some 5-star servants, including Drake. But the price for such high HP comes from her attack. With 8,014 max attack, she's the weakest 4-star rider and absolutely at the bottom tier among all the 4-stars, with only Media Lily and Saber Lily having worse attack. But what about her skills? Her first skill is Protection of the Faith A, which greatly increases debuff resist between 50 to 100% for 3 turns, and greatly restores HP between 1,000 to 2,500 for herself, depending on level. Her second skill is Miracle D, which removes debuffs from all allies and restores HP between 300 to 1,500 for all allies, depending on level. That can be further strengthened via a strengthening quest, which upgrades the heal to between 1,000 to 2,000 depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Holy Maiden's Oath rank C. And finally, her third skill also comes from a strengthening quest. It's Holy Maiden's Oath rank C, which removes buffs from an enemy and decreases their defense for 3 turns between 10 to 30% depending on level. Moving on to her passives, she has Magic Resistance A, which increases debuff resist by 20%, Divinity rank C, which increases damage by 150, and Riding rank A++, which increases quick card effectiveness by 11.5%. As for her deck and Noble Phantasm, she has a semi-arts deck with quick Arts Buster and a Buster Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Taraske, which deals heavy damage to all enemies between 300 to 500% and greatly decreases their defense for 3 turns between 20 to 40% depending on overcharge. Taking a closer look at Martha's deck, we can actually see how many hits she has on each card. Her quick card has 2 hits, her arch card has 1 hit, her buster card has 1 hit, and her extra attack has 3 hits. This is pretty much standard for released servants. They tend to have a lower amount of hits, and her Noble Phantasm gain modifier is 1.58% with a star rate of 9%. To put that all in layman's terms, she does have extremely high Noble Phantasm gain, specifically due to her 3 arts cards, but she is not a very efficient crit star generator. Martha is a very misleading servant. Much like her character, she isn't what she appears to be at first glance. Case in point, if you thought she was a healer, you're missing out on her strength. Her miracle skill is great, not for the healing part of it, but because it has debuff removal. And as I mentioned in a lot of other spotlights, debuff removal is one of the most important things in the game. But while most supports have debuff removal built into their Noble Phantasm, like Media Lily and Joan, Martha has it tied to a skill, which is even better in some cases since it's more reliable. It can be used immediately right when you need it. And post-interlude, the heal on Miracle becomes slightly better. Speaking of interludes, Martha's third skill that she gets after her strengthening quest is very strong as well. Holy Maiden's Oath complements Miracle nicely by removing all buffs from an enemy and lowering their defense. Buff removal is just as important as debuff removal, so the fact that both of these are tied to her skills makes her a very potent disruptor, and she can really change the enemy strategy at a moment's notice. And do remember, Evade, Guts, and Invincibility are enemy buffs, so she can remove those as well. Martha's Noble Phantasm is also great for farming. A Buster Noble Phantasm means it'll do a fair bit more damage, and her high Noble Phantasm charge makes it so that it's a little bit more spammable. For that reason, she's absolutely great for farming QP or EXP. It's also worth noting that the defense down on her Noble Phantasm and on her Holy Maiden's Oath skill can stack, so you can decrease an enemy's defense by up to 70% for 3 turns. And that's about where the positives end for Martha. Currently, without her strengthening quest, she's missing a critical portion of her kit in that debuff removal and defense down. And while her first skill provides a decent self-heal and 100% debuff resist for 3 turns, which is good, but just not on her. Having an entire party debuff removal in another skill makes this one kind of redundant, and in addition, like I mentioned during the Hector spotlight, Martha isn't your damage dealer or major support, so her being debuffed doesn't matter as much as Herc or Gil or Waver being debuffed. If this skill was targetable, it would be much better. It would actually be one of the better support skills in the entire game, but as it is, it just doesn't work that well on her since it only targets herself. I really recommend leveling Miracle first for the cooldown reduction and the stronger heal, and then going with Protection of the Faith for the stronger heal, followed by Holy Maiden's Oath for the defense down increase. Though you can also go with Holy Maiden's Oath second if you prefer to max that defense down instead of the heal. In addition, while her deck does give her fantastic Noble Phantasm gain, it's still a mismatched deck, and my opinion on mismatched decks hasn't changed. They're inconsistent and not optimized because of the inability to bust her Brave Chain on her Noble Phantasm, which drastically decreases her damage, and the inability to Arch Brave Chain on her Noble Phantasm, which drastically decreases her ability to spam her Noble Phantasm. So yes, even though she does have 3 Arch cards, and that does mean she can spam her Noble Phantasm slightly more, she isn't going to be as good at it as, say, someone with 3 Arch cards and an Arch Noble Phantasm. Now, Buster Noble Phantasm is also just a really strange choice on her, considering damage is the last thing you want to use her for, but that's where her team comes in. And Martha pairs well with pretty much anyone since her skills provide something that any servant can benefit from. She works best in Arch teams alongside other supports that can complement her like Waver or Hans and David, but she also helps out any offensive servants since she can soften enemy targets for them so that they can hit even harder. So she works well with Gil, Herc, or any of the other Berserkers, Saber Alter, Ushi, pretty much any offensive servant, especially the single target ones. And since she works well as a farmer, you can also pair her alongside Medusa, Marie, or Drake for QP and experience farming. But really, Martha can work on nearly any team, so feel free to experiment. And as for craft essences, her Bond Craft Essence staff he gave me is a pretty powerful one. It increases the HP recovery amount of all allies by 30%, and while Martha isn't the best healer around, it does make her healing a lot more potent, and since it applies to all allies, it does make her ideal for pairing alongside Marie or Media Lily to further increase their own healing. If you don't have her Bond Craft Essence, you can also go with Divine Banquet and Prisma Cosmos or Kaleidoscope. Cosmos and Banquet are for better Noble Phantasm gain, and Kaleidoscope is best when you're farming with her. Personally, I think you can also go with Another Ending, which works phenomenally on her since as a rider she is prone to crit often. And with a deck of mostly Arts cards, that means not only will her crits be doing more damage, but her Arts will be more efficient, and her overall Noble Phantasm gain will be much better. So don't overlook this craft essence on Martha. My overall opinion on Martha is, while she's a bit underwhelming herself, she fits a unique role not as a white mage healer like Media Lily, but as a hexer. Her buff manipulation is very strong and not something found in many other servants. Being able to not only clear all the debuffs on your team, but also remove all the enemy buffs and stack defense debuffs on enemies is something that's highly useful in every major battle. Unfortunately, her damage is very low, which wouldn't be a big deal if she didn't have a Buster Noble Phantasm, and much like David and Emiya, her deck is just suboptimal since she can't Buster or Arch Brave Chain her Noble Phantasm. Still, it's hard to argue her usefulness, so she gets a solid B from me. Martha is by no means OP or exceptional, but she is a solid addition to almost any team, and she can provide some clutch utility with her debuff and buff removal and her defense down stacking in tough boss fights. So it's hard not to recommend her. Well, those are my thoughts on Martha. Do let me know what you guys think in the comments, and also please check out the Marie Spotlight, also up on the channel today, link in the description. And don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. And I'll see you guys in the next Servant Spotlight. Later.